The pale green door, unkeeping the marks of a life and the grace of being brought inside. When I first moved into this house in 2017, while I was traveling back and forth between West Virginia and D.C., there was a small two-room structure outside beside where the grapevines are now. Mom always called it the wash house. By the time we got to it, it was in terrible disrepair. Roof sagging, board soft, more memory than building. The roofline dipped in the middle where years of weather had slowly pressed it downward. The boards along the base had begun to darken and crumble where moisture had settled into them. There was no saving it. But we didn't just knock it down. We took it apart, piece by piece, barnwood by barnwood. Each board pried loose carefully, the old nails resisting at first, and then giving way with that hollow creak that old wood makes when it finally releases its hold. My great-grandparents had lived in that structure while the current house was being built. I try to imagine that now, starting life in two small rooms while something more permanent rose beside it. The kind of beginning that requires patience. The kind where you build what you can with what you have, trusting that the larger structure will come in time. There's something steady about that kind of beginning. Inside the wash house, there was a door that separated the two rooms. Pale green, rusted handles and hinges, dirt settled into the grain in all the right places. The paint had thinned along the edges where hands must have pushed it open and pulled it closed thousands of times. It wasn't charming in the curated antique store sense. It was worn in the way things become worn when they have actually been used. I fell in love with it immediately. Dad was not impressed. He saw a project, something to sand down, restore, clean up, make bright and shiny and perfect again. In his defense, that is often his instinct. Improve it, fix it, make it better than it was. He looked at the peeling paint and the rust along the hinges and saw work waiting to be done. Mom has always joked that this is why she goes to the gym. If she gets old and inconvenient, she would prefer not to be improved right out of the house. But I didn't want that door improved. I wanted it kept. There was something about the rusted hinges and the pale green paint worn thin at the edges that felt honest. It had already done its work. It had already held space between rooms. It had already stood through seasons I will never fully know. Through winters with wood smoke in the air. Through summers when the windows must have been pushed open to catch whatever breeze wandered through the hills. Sanding it smooth felt like erasing a language I couldn't quite translate but didn't want to lose. So we carried it inside. It sits behind an old rocking chair now. I ordered a magnolia wreath with dried pink hydrangeas to hang on it, not to disguise it, but to frame it. The magnolia leaves are deep green and waxy. The hydrangeas soften to that faded, dirty pink that only dried flower seems to manage. The door didn't need to become new. It just needed to be brought in. I've thought about that more than I expected to. There is a kind of making new that insists on polish, on stripping away the marks, on sanding down the evidence that something has weathered, on replacing the worn places so thoroughly that nothing of the old story remains. And then there is another kind. The kind that does not erase the scars but redeems them. The kind that does not deny the rust but refuses to discard what has already carried weight. The kind that brings what was outside in. Scripture talks about being made new. We often picture brightness, clean edges, no trace of what came before. But resurrection is not the absence of scars. Christ rose with his still visible. Maybe being made new is less about becoming unmarked and more about becoming reclaimed. Less about restoration to perfection and more about being carried into the light and given a place to stand. The pale green door didn't need to be restored. It simply needed to be lifted from the ruins of the wash house and brought inside, where the light could fall across the worn paint and the rusted hinges could finally rest. And somehow, that feels closer to the gospel than a coat of fresh paint ever could.